Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Future of BizTech. I'm your host, JC Granger, and I have the pleasure of interviewing the co founder and CRO of DOKKA, Eric Edelstein. Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself and what is DOKKA? What do you guys do? Who do you help out?
So, see, I'm excited to be here. So, DOKKA is helping CFOs and accounting departments of mid-market companies around the world, primarily in the US, Australia, UK, to automate the accounting process even further.
So, what does that entail? I remember I was looking at your website and there was a lot of AI functionality to it. Kind of walk me through what types of companies work with you guys and how does it make their current systems better or, their financial system or whatever with DOKKA?
Well, a typical client will be a company with around 50 to 500 people. We'll have an accounting and finance team of two, three, four, five people in the team, primarily a CFO, a financial controller, maybe a head of accounts payable. And they'll already be using a software package or an ERP like NetSuite or SAP Business One or Acumatica. And the challenge is that there are a lot of parts to that ERP or accounting software that are still either manual or could be made more efficient. And that's what DOKKA does. It picks up all those pieces and it's able to actually automate and create more efficiencies in that side.
That's awesome. Well, what kind of advantages does that give a company? Like, is it more time savings? Is it cost savings? Like, what's the really big value add once they've implemented DOKKA and it's running?
Well, maybe the best thing is for me to give you a couple of examples.
Yeah.
Um, the most straightforward one is that these companies usually get quite a lot of documents each month, especially bills, which they call the accounts payable side. And the process would really be that in the old days, the accountant or the bookkeeper would take the document, they would look at it, they would match it against a purchase order or other documents, and then they would need to start working out what those financial entries or bookkeeping entries are. So they
Mhm.
would be finding the date, they'd be finding the line items, they'd be taking the VAT or the GST amounts, and they would then have to actually work out the entry and manually put it into the ERP system. And in addition, they would need to also figure out whether they want to try upload the document into the ERP itself. So with DOKKA, all of that becomes automated. The document gets uploaded in our system, and using AI, we automatically will figure out what is the bookkeeping entry. On the one side of the screen, you've got the document. On the other, you've got the bookkeeping entry. And the accountant glances at it, clicks the button, and it all gets pushed and updated into the ERP. And that's one example. DOKKA consists of many, many sub products or sub features like that.
What are some of the other, like, let's say if you had to pick your top two sub features that are also really important or, really interesting to people that they, gravitate towards, what would those be?
So I think another feature that we get asked for all the time, and we've made it more complicated and sophisticated and complex over time, is the approval process. So a document comes in, it needs to be paid. Before it needs to get paid, maybe one person needs to sign off on it. Maybe a whole team does. Maybe it needs to be rerouted to different people. So the DOKKA platform includes a full automated approval process. We've got digital signatures. So what happens is when you sign the document, it will automatically stamp your signature onto the document and it will show a whole process to the management team of which documents have been approved and which still need to be approved.
Okay. So essentially accounts payable and accounts receivable people love you, right? Because this makes their job easier, I imagine, right? They can really get like most of this all done in a shorter amount of time rather than the manual process.
Yeah, so it's definitely about saving time and becoming more efficient. Now, one of the things is that it obviously saves time, but in all parts of AI, accountants are always worried that AI is going to replace jobs. So, I mean, that's the elephant in the room. We might as well address it now. We don't believe that good CFOs or accountants are going to lose their jobs. We believe that it's going to be less number crunching and it's going to be more value add, more strategic thinking and more time spent on what's needed to make the business become more successful.
Yeah, so and I kind of agree with you a little bit on this because I think a lot of people do, of course, they do freak out about the AI taking jobs. Let's not, to be clear, it does and it will. But the question being is that there are certain jobs and certain softwares that may not threaten it as much as, like you said, it can free up that time for them to be using, their human brain on advancing the initiatives of the company. I think a lot of people don't focus on that part. They just look at how it's taking away their busy work. But honestly, humans weren't really designed for busy work. We're designed for, creative and critical thinking, right? And so if you have someone who's intelligent working on busy work, they're not using their brains to come up with new ideas, right? So that, like you said, that could grow the company. And if the company grows, well, then it could hire more people also for those roles. So AI can't take everything. So I do agree with you on that. Um, but let's talk. What made you start DOKKA? I mean, so where are you calling from now? And then kind of walk us through the early company journey here and how long you guys have been around.
So I'm South African. You might be able to guess from my accent. And I've spent time all over the world in previous startups that I've created. I've lived in London for many years. I've lived in San Francisco in the Valley. Unbelievable experiences. And about 8 years ago, I decided to move to Israel to actually live here. There's a massive technology center here. There's a lot of innovation happening here. And when I arrived here, I decided it was time to create another startup, much to the dismay of my wife, who really did not want me to enter the startup space again, because any startup, it doesn't matter how many times you've done it or what you've done, it's long hours, it's stressful, it involves a huge amount of sacrifice in order to be able to push it forward. And
Mhm.
yeah, I arrived in Israel and I decided it's time to start another startup. And we've been having a lot of adventure since. That's the best way of describing it.
Yeah, it's a roller coaster for sure. I've always said that being an entrepreneur is having a delusional confidence in what you're doing, and it's just you know crazy spikes of endorphins and cortisol in the system. A lot of stress, happy moments, bad moments. It's all over the place. So I can see, like, I get it. Like, I can see why you would do it, and then I can also see why she probably didn't want you to. But hey, listen, you made it work. You guys have been around 8 years. You're a successful company. You're growing. But what were some of the struggles initially? There's always struggles, right? It's never gonna be all rainbows and unicorns, so to speak. So what were the initial barriers or walls that you kind of came up against when you were first building this out?
In my previous startups that I did, I always had co-founders and I didn't want to create a new startup purely on my own. So my first objective was to find the right co-founder. And that to me was a very, very challenging proposition. I'm sitting in a new country. It's a different language, it's a different culture. And how do you find someone that you both can trust and gels with you and has a similar vision of where you want to go? So that to me was a very big challenge in the beginning, finding the right co-founder.
Yeah, that's a good point. Even I've struggled with that in the past as well. I mean, that's a hard. I think a co-founder is like finding a good spouse, right? There's a lot there, and just like with marriages, if it goes bad, it can cost a lot of money, right? So you don't want a co-founder divorce any more than you want, a spousal divorce. They both kind of have the same outcome sometimes. But what about the current struggles? So I mean, obviously, again, you're successful now, but what are some of the things that you kind of deal with on a day-to-day basis that you're really trying to overcome right now?
I think now we've reached that stage. We have around about 60 people in the company. We've got people all over the world. We've got a very large customer base now. Now we're in that stage where it's all about scaling. And there's definitely a challenge about starting up and about getting the momentum going and the ball rolling, where the founders are pretty much doing everything themselves and you don't have people to do things. And then you start getting a few people and you're able to outsource a bit of the work and things start moving a bit faster. But when you really start scaling, new problems emerge. So one of the things for us at the moment is we've got a great customer base in the US, we've got a great customer base in the UK and in Australia. And where do we focus our time and attention? Each of those areas have different cultures, different requirements, different software requirements. And do we say to ourselves, do them all at the same time? Or do we actually start focusing our efforts on one or two geographic regions rather than multiple regions at the same time?
Hmm. Okay. You mentioned that we're in the pre-show here. I mean, uh, that obviously you're in Israel, like you said, and I'm curious how the current situation of this big conflict with Israel and Iran is affecting business. How has that disrupted kind of just what you guys are trying to do on a day-to-day basis, and what are you doing to get around that so you can keep operations, smooth?
So, first of all, I really do believe that all of us want to try to find peace as quickly as possible. It's a difficult situation. It's been said over and over again that Israelis are resilient, and I see that day in and day out. We get a barrage of rockets coming in. We go to our shelter. We take our laptops and carry on working, unless the children are there interrupting us. And 30 minutes after the barrage finishes, we back at our desks, back at the offices. The coffee shops are full again. I think the concept of Israel is this is life and we need to actually deal with it the best we can. So, is it stressful? Sure, it's stressful for me, for my family, for my children, but we do what it takes. And so, as soon as anything or a situation happens, we try to say to ourselves, how do we get back to life as normal as quickly as possible? And I think when they talk about resilience of Israelis, that's what they mean. You just have to carry on through good and through bad.
Yeah, it's such a wild world that we're living in right now, where I mean, like you kind of describe what I remember the back in, historically in the 40s, the Londoners, what they would describe during the German air raids, right? It's like the sirens would go off, everyone clears the streets, get in the bunkers, you hear a bunch of the bombs hitting, and then everyone just goes back up, sweeps up the glass, they finish their coffee, like just goes back like almost like nothing happened. And I remember thinking like how bizarre that is, but also how resilient, right? And I think that it shows human nature. I think humans in general can be that resilient. And when you realize like, hey, there's what you can control and there's what you can't. And so it sounds like you guys are really good at focusing on what you can control. So I mean, I know that for anyone listening in the pre-show, you had just got out of your shelter like 20 minutes ago, right? Because you got an alert on your phone. And who knows, this might happen while we're recording. I hope not, obviously. But that's wild. But I'm glad that you guys, it says a lot about your people and yourself that you guys are functioning and being real smooth with business, even with all this going on, right? So, I mean, I think that would give me a lot of confidence personally if I was a client, knowing that you were doing a great job, even with these massive things that would distract anyone else, right? Obviously. Um,
I
but
can
on
tell
that,
you,
yeah,
I can tell you, and sorry to interrupt, I can tell you
no,
that
go.
these days business has changed. And so in the past, you'd find that most employees or most people in a business were all situated in one place, one country or one city. They were all sitting at the desk. And a lot of companies these days have different structures. Our structure is very different. We 100% remote. We have got a team over here locally, but most of our team is actually spread around the world. So we've got people all over the world. And so, yeah, maybe if I'm not able to work for a couple of minutes, I know that my colleagues jump in and they do whatever needs to be done. And I think a lot of companies are like that these days, where it's no longer a situation that if something happens locally, the whole business stops. It's like people are all over the world and business carries on as normal.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I guess that's something that most people don't realize or hasn't really been talked about when it comes to the whole like debate about remote work versus going back to office. And not that there's conflict everywhere, but you look at Ukraine, for example, as well. Israel and Iran is another spot. But you're right, like a lot of the decentralization of corporate structure does actually kind of help in a really bad situation like this, because if you've got people spread out everywhere, well then, you're not a coffee shop, for example, where it's like, well, if it happens right here, it happens right here, and then we have to shut down. But no, that's a good point that you make. um
And I'll tell you
what do
the other
you
interesting thing on that is that when the business started, we did actually, you mentioned Ukraine, and we actually hired a couple of people in Ukraine, and that was pre the war there. The war started, and I remember saying to the team over there, like, how are you actually able to function? How can you do the work day to day? And they said to me, like the same way that I've said to you now, they said, you know what? Life carries on. So whatever it takes to actually get the job done. And I couldn't quite understand that until it started happening to me as well. And the same
Yeah.
thing, it's yeah, there are periods which are very stressful, but there are a lot of periods where work carries on and I sit at my desk for 8 hours and nothing happens. And then maybe something interrupts me. But the same way that people in South Africa, they figure out how to get around the crime there. And in Ukraine, they get around what's happening over there. And here in Israel, we're getting around it as well. Business actually needs to continue. And I think entrepreneurs and good businesses will figure out how to actually move the needle forward no matter what happens.
Yeah, I agree. That's again, like you said, that resilience. I think that's really cool. And also, yeah, interesting because you hire the Ukrainians and then they have conflict and then now you're kind of learning firsthand where they're coming from. And that's, I mean, I hope we don't have to learn firsthand. I hope no one else has to. I mean, that's just the world can be wild sometimes, but you guys are pushing through it, which is great. Well, let's talk a little about your growth. So, I mean, what are kind of your growth goals and what are you doing to get there? Like, what kind of marketing are you guys doing? Like, how are people finding out about DOKKA?
So when we started, we brought on a VP marketing that's absolutely fantastic on the SEO side, and he built us a really good base on the SEO side. Where these days, I mean, we get millions of searches every month, and we get a huge amount of visitors just from the SEO side.
Oh,
Once we've
great.
created that base, we then set ourselves, what are the other tenets of marketing we need to do? And we analyzed all of them. I think a lot of companies really believe you need to do the conference circuit. And we do a couple of conferences in order to face and get to know people. But the best way of scaling a business, especially a SaaS business, we believe is through paid advertising. And so we decided very early on that we wanted to have across all the different platforms a very aggressive strategy on there. So whether it's LinkedIn or Google or Bing, which is primarily the B2B side, but even platforms like Facebook, we've really invested a lot of time and effort and obviously money in order to be able to create the right campaigns and the right strategy around that, which really allows us to be able to, I guess, become omniscient, if that's the right word, to the audience.
Mhm.
Because let's take the accountants, for example, in the US. Let's say there are a million accountants and CFOs and accounts payable in our market. That's our market. That's who we want to know about DOKKA. And we decided early on that one of the best ways of doing that is to be able to like use paid advertising to achieve that.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, I've always agreed with that when it comes to like SaaS companies or AI or anything like that. I mean, paid advertising is one of the more scalable ways. I'm also a big fan of like cold outbound email if done right, and LinkedIn as well. If you're going for more like the enterprise level, because you did mention that the size of companies that you guys work with are what that like 50 employee plus kind of range.
Yeah,
Yeah,
50 to 500. Yeah.
yeah. What are your 12 like if we had this podcast again in a year? What would your company look like? What are the kind of the growth goals?
I really believe the objective is to double year on year. Now, that's quite a large goal, but at the moment we're on track to do it. We're growing rapidly. Remember 3, 4 years ago, think to myself, like when I saw the budgets for 4, 5 years ahead, forecasts, I thought to myself, would we be able to achieve it? And yeah, we not only achieving it, I think we could over exceed it. We're growing rapidly. Um, at the moment, the US market is important for us, and we've got a nice market there. But the US is so massive that when I look at the size of our customer base relative to the size of the US market, we could grow even quicker than that if we get the right strategy.
Nice. Yeah, I mean this is the big leagues as they call it, right? America, you can if you expand into here, it's hard to see the ceiling for sure because there's a lot of money to be made here. But let's talk about the future of the industry. So where do you see kind of like AI and finance, within companies, where do you see that going in the next couple years? Is there any new industry interesting like innovations you see coming or that you guys are working on? Like, where do you see this in a couple years going?
So we spent a couple of years building our platform for the accounts payable side in order to automate that. And I mentioned to you the invoice processing and the approval flows and the document management. That's all part of the AP. And once we built up a customer base and we started speaking to our customers, we realized that there's even more challenging problem. And it doesn't really relate to small businesses. It really is for mid-market and enterprise. And that's the close at the end of the month. Because what we found is that during the month, companies are doing whatever they need to get the books updated. And then at the end of each month, they need to close it off. And that
Mhm.
close, and this to me actually blew my mind when I heard it, could take anywhere from a week up to 3 weeks every month. So you've got a team of people doing the books each month, and then you've either got the same team or you've got a different team trying to close the books, which could basically take a couple of weeks.
That's a pretty long trailing time to because you're always kind of behind, right? Essentially, no matter what, right? And yours, how fast do you think you can get it down to? Like same day? Like I mean, because it's taken them weeks right now to close out. Where do you see it as being as the speed that it can start tackling all this?
But just to clarify, every single business is different. I mean, some businesses, the close might be a couple of days, some it might be a week, but the worst case scenario is that it could actually be a couple of weeks. I would say
Mhm.
the average is probably maybe a week to a week and a half. That's the average close. And we really believe that we could build a new product in order to reduce that by anywhere from 50, 60, 70% of time. So we
Okay.
spent the last 2 years building a prototype. Um, when I say that the challenge and the complexity of the close is so much greater than the AP side, close for us was a really big challenge. The amount of functionality and features we needed was exponentially more than AP. We launched it about 6 months ago, and so far the reaction has been fantastic. It really has saved a phenomenal amount of time for the early adopters, those existing customer of ours that have started using it. And at the
Mhm.
moment, we're seeing anywhere from 50, 60, 70% savings. We believe we can even get it higher than that. So it's really exciting. I believe that the innovation across the board in accounting is going to be exciting. At the moment, we focused on AP and close. You asked me where we're going in the future. We really would like to automate the entire accounting process, every single part of it.
Wow, that'd be amazing. Yeah, I don't like doing it, so yeah. I can't imagine anyone else really super enjoys it if we can, faster the better. What do you think is the best advice that you could give to because you've lived a lot of places, right? You've started multiple companies. Um, what advice would you give to kind of maybe like a younger CEO or someone looking to pull the trigger on their own startup, right? Just from everything that you learned, other than, the obvious one is, stick with it, never give up. Okay, well, we all got that part down, but what other piece of advice would you give to someone who maybe their wife's also telling them not to do it?
I don't think there's one thing. I think definitely a defining moment for me is when I decided to live in the Valley for a couple of months. Coming from South Africa, the ecosystem, the tech ecosystem there, we believed was very vibrant. But when you actually saw what was happening in the Valley, it's an absolutely different ballgame. And me meeting startups and VCs day in, day out for a couple of months, that changed the way I think about it. So, one of the things I definitely think is that if you're serious about startups and about the ecosystem, go and experience it, whether it's in Silicon Valley or New York, or whether it's in Berlin or whether it's in Tel Aviv. There are a couple of spots around the world where there's so much happening. And I really think that startup entrepreneurs should go and spend a month or two living there, even if they're not building their startups from those cities.
That's really good advice. Yeah, I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I grew up around the whole culture, and you're right. There's just so much happening all at once, and it's Mecca for tech startups essentially, right? Like that's where you go for the action, right? It's Vegas for gamblers, so to speak. Um, but listen, Eric, it was really great having you on. Where can people find you personally if they heard something that they liked and they want to reach out to you? And then where can they find DOKKA?
So Docker is at docker.com. It's DOKKA.com. In terms of finding me, probably the easiest way is just connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm on the whole time chatting to people, speaking to people, and try not to send me one of these messages pitching your product to me in the first message. Send me something interesting so we can have a conversation. And yeah, I love talking to people. I'm spending the whole day just speaking to people from LinkedIn, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, please, for the love of God, do not send pitches right away. I mean, come on, people.
I'm probably getting, honestly, maybe 10 to 20 a day at the moment. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is getting. I hope that Microsoft is a big company and they own LinkedIn and they've got a lot of AI stuff. I imagine they're going to be implementing some maybe smarter inboxing things. Maybe where you can even customize. What kind of messages you want to get. So if Microsoft is listening, please implement these for all of us because anyone listening who has LinkedIn knows exactly what we're talking about, right? We want it's not that we don't want to buy things or hire people. It's that there's a certain order of operations and how much we want to see in any given day, right?
And
So
and
listen,
I
oh
know
yeah.
that we were ending off, but you mentioned earlier on a really interesting point about AI and about maybe doing outbound campaigns. And I think with software these days, unless LinkedIn and the other platforms come to the party, it's probably going to get worse because the way of using AI to customize outbound messaging is becoming unbelievably sophisticated. And there needs to be ways from the platforms themselves of figuring out how to create more genuine conversation rather than AI pitching the whole day.
Well, but I mean, I will say this though. When AI can help because it is customized and it's not the same message just repeated to everyone, right? I actually think that, listen, it's kind of like watching commercials on TV, right? Hulu, I think, was one of the first ones I remember a long time ago where they would ask you if you liked that commercial or if you liked, or like, is this relevant to you or not? And they were collecting data on you so that they're like, listen, you're going to have to watch commercials, but let's make sure it's the ones you actually care about. Like, do you like car commercials, sports cars instead of diapers? Because, if you don't have a kid, why do you care about a diapers commercial? So I will say that the custom tailoring that comes with innovations in AI could actually make the pitching process more pleasant for the recipient. So for that, I think I'll defend it a little bit, but I do also think the problem is the volume, just how much of it is. So like I enjoy a good customized pitch. I just don't enjoy 100 a day. That's the real difference, right?
Yeah, I hear you. I agree with that.
Well, listen, for everyone else listening to the podcast today, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Future of Biz Tech. Hey, if you liked what you heard, if you like me, if you like Eric or anything that either of us said here today, give it a 5-star rating, send it to a friend because that is how other tech nerds like you and I can find cool podcasts like this one. Eric, thank you so much for being on the show again. And hey, stay safe out there and be resilient. And thank you all. Thank you for what you're doing with your company. I think it's really cool and it provides a big value.
Great. Have a great day, and thanks for having me on the show.
You too.